Have you faced any backlash from the medical community for your dietary switch?
I actually have been vegan for about 8 years. I wasn't being told the truth. I felt like I was being lied to. I was told that if I go down this plant-based dietary pattern, that's going to be the healthiest diet for me and my family. A plant-based diet only focuses on the non-essential nutrients. People in Hong Kong, they live longer than anybody and they eat the equivalent of 2 steaks per person per day. I say if we fix that, that's 80% of all chronic illnesses.
Hey carnivores, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Bella the Steak and Butter Gal. Hope you all are having an amazing meat fueled day. And as always, drop a comment down below, update me on how you all are doing. Today, I will be inviting on Dr. Tony Hampton. He is an ex-vegan turned carnivore family physician and doctor. He was vegan for a total of 8 years. He will be talking about all of the lies that he found out regarding health and nutrition. We will be exploring all of the misconceptions and arguments about how a vegan diet is better than a carnivore diet. So without further ado, let's get started.
Happy to be here, by the way. Family doctor, an obesity doctor, metabolic health doc is what I call myself, and just trying to spread the message of metabolic health to those who need to hear that message, which is most of us. So thank you for inviting me.
So I did want to open up this conversation just connecting on how we both have a history of being vegan. We're both
Yes.
ex-vegans turned carnivore. How did you go from being a vegan to now being carnivore?
I actually have been vegan for about 8 years. I did a Google search, and when I did a Google search, it led me down the plant-based rabbit hole. And I think that happens in the carnivore space, in the plant-based space. And I went down that rabbit hole because I was having issues with my stomach. And I was trying to find a diet that would help my stomach heal. So this is the issue, though. I wasn't being told the truth. I felt like I was being lied to. I was told that if I go down this plant-based dietary pattern, that's going to be the healthiest diet for me and my family. I later learned that the studies that I was relying on, like the China study, was not a reliable source. I learned about the blue zones, and I learned that that wasn't a reliable source. And Colin Campbell, when he put out the China study, he said to us that, listen, I did the experiment on the mice or the rats or whatever he was doing. There's an association, a correlation between them eating milk protein and their risk for cancer. So when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, that's a problem. But what he didn't say out loud is that so-called association correlation, you can't then jump and say, because it's an animal protein all animal protein causes cancer. And that's the leap of faith he took. And I believed that back then. And now I know that you can't make those kind of statements. It's an observational study, which does not show causation. So you can't really rely on that type of information. That's number one. Number two, I learned that the blue zones methodology was not completely true. In other words, there's a lot of things about the blue zone story that's really positive. Dan Buettner, who put the blue zones out there, which was also an observation, and his observation is that it's a plant lean that leads to longevity and centenarians, people who live to 100. So rather it's Okinawa, Japan, Costa Rica, and those other places, Loma Linda, California, the assumption is that you have to be plant-based to be healthy. And then you later learned, and in one of the studies, they even made a big video about this, there was a study, the Japanese in Okinawa, Japan, not only were they not plant-based, but in the study, they didn't find not one vegetarian, to suggest that the blue zones is the only way to do it and that they're plant-based is just not true. So for me, I really want to live in a world where people are given correct information. And I think for me, I went down the expert opinion rabbit hole. So I think it's important that everybody understand it's okay to listen to experts, including myself and Raymond and Bella. But what you don't want to do is not question everything you hear. So what I do now is I always question. I try to trust but verify. And once I did that, I learned that the vegan approach was not the answer.
Dr. Hampton, I wanted to go through a list that I prepared for you of vegan versus carnivore diet statements. I'll read each of these rebuttals and arguments, and I would love for you to provide your thoughts and opinions to each. First one is, a vegan diet is better for weight loss than the carnivore diet.
No. And it goes back to the Public Health Collaborative statement. So when they compare vegan to carnivore, there is no comparison. So for those who are not sure about that, I would just search Public Health collaborative infographics. The low carb diet, carnivore's a form of that, is not even close. You're getting rid of the thing that causes insulin spikes, which is insulin is the fat storage hormone. So if you have too much insulin, the macronutrient that raises the insulin the most is the carb. So it's fairly logical. The organizations that measure which diet is best, they always rate keto as number one. They just had concerns about keto. They know keto is the best diet, or one that's like carnivore-ish.
A vegan diet is more nutritionally balanced than a carnivore diet.
No, because you have essential amino acids and essential fatty acids that come from an animal-based diet. There's no essential carbs. So if your only diet is a plant-based diet, you're going to automatically have those deficiencies that were mentioned before, the vitamin Ds, the omega-3s, the zincs, the iron. So there's a little bit more work to be done with a plant-based diet. And again, you can get an expert in front of you that'll help you, but most of my patients don't have the resources to do that. So a animal-based diet gives you essential nutrients, where a plant-based diet only focuses on the non-essential nutrients.
A vegan diet is a more human-appropriate diet than carnivore.
Again, ethics come in, right? I think a regenerative farming practice is very ethical. You let the animal live a full life, but I mean a pretty decent life. They graze, they help take care of the ground. We put the carbon back into the ground. I think that's ethical. I do like humans more. So if I can have a dietary pattern that allows humans to thrive, that's what I'm going to lean towards, while recognizing that in order to have life, you have to have death. And that's okay. We just make sure that while we're on the planet, we honor the food that we consume. And I would argue that a hunter honors their meat way more than a person who's going to the grocery store. They understand where it came from. They maybe even raise the animal that they are going to consume for nutrition. So I would argue they get it more. I think people should check out Diana Rogers and her documentary that talked about this, because I think Sacred Cow, because I think that when you understand the science a little bit better, I think you'll do a little bit better.
A vegan diet is low cholesterol, so it's better for your heart health than eating meat.
If I was concerned about cholesterol, I would agree with that statement, but I'm not concerned about cholesterol. In fact, when you just search what is the cholesterol, it's going to include the good and the bad and the ugly. So the cholesterol number means nothing. The LDL cholesterol, which we worry about the most, is not to be worried about because it's a poor predictor of heart disease. The total cholesterol and the LDL, if that's the baseline, your blood pressure is twice as predictive of future heart disease. And the even better test is a fasting insulin, which is 6.7 times more predictive of a future heart attack. The gold standard is a heart scan. So if you're worried about your risk for heart disease, get a calcium heart scan. That'll be more predictive than cholesterol will ever be. Therefore, if I'm plant-based and I'm focused on that, I get it, but you're focused on the wrong thing. And that's why that's the biggest argument they make. It's going to raise your LDL, your cholesterol. Well, it doesn't matter. And if I do care, I'm going to do particle size. I'm going to do a LDL small and large particle comparison. I'm going to look at the ApoB to A ratio. And when you do a low carb diet, which is carnivore, the metabolic measures get better. In fact, your ApoB to A ratio gets worse with plant-based. It gets worse. Your triglycerides and HDL ratio gets worse. So, and if that's the better measure of heart disease than the total cholesterol and the LDL, then I would prefer to be metabolically healthy and have a dietary pattern that achieves that.
A vegan diet has a lower cancer risk than a carnivore diet.
So this is the deal. If you look at the studies that were done that suggest that a animal-based diet was a risk factor for cancer, it's all observational. And we can end that question with that.
A vegan diet is better for the planet than a carnivore diet.
I think that a dietary pattern that's good for humans is the best diet, number one. And as humans with a big brain, we're able to then take that information and say, how can we honor the planet? How can we honor the people who maybe they have a religion where they can't eat a cow? Maybe they worship a cow, like Hindus, right? So if that's so we need to be on a planet where we're rational And we understand that there may be different, if you go to certain parts of India, then a plant-based diet is more of the standard than maybe in other parts of the world. So we're going to honor that. What we're not going to do is make these bold statements that the only way to heal is to be plant-based. And again, we've seen and I'll always remember again when I did a video about the blue zones, everybody in the blue zones eats meat or fish. So let's stop this nonsense. Let's recognize that people in Hong Kong, they live, longer than anybody, and they eat the equivalent of 2 steaks per person per day. There are multiple ways to achieve optimal health. We're just saying to the world that carnivore should be on that list. And then as people are trying to achieve that goal, we're here to help them. And for those who want to stay plant-based, have at it. Because like I said, vegans and carnivores should be able to live in harmony, but we're not going to live in a world where we tell people what to eat because we think that's the best way to eat. We're going to live in a country where we give people choice.
If you would like to get to know Dr. Tony Hampton, ask him your questions. Dr. Hampton is a resident expert in our community, the Steak and Butter Gang. I will also be inviting on all the faces shown on the screen, Dr. Sean Baker, Dr. Anthony Chafee, Dr. Elizabeth Bright, Dr. Robert Kiltz, and Coach Rebecca Heichman. To join the upcoming challenge, just visit the URL shown on the screen, sbgmeetup.com, or click the links down below in the description box.
For everyone watching this video, there are so many studies out there. How can we know which one is legit, which one to trust, which to not look at?
The first thing you ask yourself is, was this study a randomized controlled trial? If the answer is yes, you can trust that more. If it's an observational study, meaning it's a food frequency questionnaire where they just sent questionnaires to your house, and who knows how many steaks you had this past year? Who knows how many blueberries you ate this past year? Those types of studies do not show causation. They only show association and possible correlation. So the goal is, to the degree you have a study in front of you that is a randomized controlled trial, you trust that. The second thing you do is you say, well, who sponsored the study? There's always bias, so you want to make sure you at least know that. That does not mean that a plant-based proponent can't do a study that you trust. You just need to know that that person was plant-based or even carnivore so that you'll be able to understand their perspective as they are trying to put this data in front of you. And so the key is to know who made the study. Was it a quality study? Does it meet the definition of what they think is keto or carnivore, for example? So I would say if it's a keto study and the carbs are greater than 50 per day, then it's not a keto study. So it has to meet the definition. So I would look into the weeds and make sure, was it, how many people were in the study? And you want to make sure that that's of a high quality. So I just think that you want to have these big things you look at and never trust the headlines, because the headlines are looking for drama. And if you have a study that is a randomized controlled trial that's already been done, and then the new study comes out and say meat's harmful and it's an observational study, it means nothing because you can't compare those two studies. I'm not sure why they keep making studies like that when they've kind of proven that saturated fat is not a problem anymore, is not causing, red meat's not causing cancer. When they've proven this already and they continue to message the same thing, it's very confusing to people. And again, I would ask all clinicians to also be open to looking at the guidelines as only guidance, but you don't have to follow that. Now, that may be a little different for nutrition professionals, but for doctors, they do not. They're guidelines. And if you can prove that what you're recommending makes sense, then you can just document that in a chart and move forward. For example, the keto versus DASH diet was a study that came out in June. And in that study, they found that the keto diet was 3 times more effective for diabetes, twice as effective for hypertension, and of course, twice as effective for weight loss. But DASH diet is the standard of care. But if you say to the patient, you know what, I think this keto diet makes more sense for you. How about if we go in that direction and we'll just document based on the evidence, we think this dietary approach is better. The problem is nutrition science is not being closely monitored by the doctors. Therefore, they probably haven't even heard of that study yet. But yet, but it's logical to us because we knew that all of those grains would raise the blood sugar compared to the diet that doesn't have all the grains. So it should be logical, but they just hadn't done the study. That's why research is so foundational. We can change the grassroots movement and impact people, but until we affect health systems and insurers, we're gonna continue to have to fight. And that's why I'm hoping that more science is done where we compare these dietary patterns. We definitely need more research in the carnivore space as well. People think doctors know how to read research studies. Even if they learned it in school, they generally follow the headlines. So if I see the standard of care says that Mediterranean is the best diet, or a plant-based diet is the best diet, I follow those guidelines, but I don't question it. So what I was able to do in my training is to start question conventional thinking. And when I started to question it, I said, well, let me look at the study. Who sponsored the study? Was this really a low carb study, or was it, you'll have a study, they'll say low carb, and the carbs will be like 150, some crazy number. Once I started to understand how to read studies, that's when I started to shift. And about 10 years ago, that's when I started to notice that there was a SHAI study, SHAI. The SHAI study compared the Ornish study to the kind of a standard American diet and Atkins and maybe one other. And the Atkins diet was way more effective at helping people lose weight and improve their metabolic markers. So I was like, well, how could that be that an animal-based diet and it probably wasn't as clean as the one we promote, would do such a good job. So once I saw that, and even I think it had the Mediterranean there as well. And the Mediterranean and the low carb were the ones that were kind of neck and neck, but the low carb won the battle. So once I saw that, it opened my eyes and I said, well, let me start looking at real research instead of these observational studies. Let me look at randomized controlled trials. And when you look at something like the Public Health Collaborative, which has a comparison of low fat to low carb. When it comes to, significant weight loss, there is zero low fat that's better than low carb. All the low carb studies just blow it away. So when you start seeing real research, then you can say, I can now be a scientist and now make recommendations to my patients, because as a doctor, you want to make recommendations that are evidence-based. You don't want to just use my opinion, my personal experience. You want to really look at some science so that you can, and particularly when you're in a large health system. I'm with Advocate Health in 6 states. And I want to talk to my colleagues like a scientist. And now I have all the evidence I need to prove this is a better approach.
What do you think of the research that is already out there regarding the carnivore diet?
When you think about carnivore, which doesn't have a lot of randomized controlled studies yet, we do have to lean towards the studies that we have, like the Harvard study that talks about, I think it was, 2,029 people who gave their feedback about how they were doing with the carnivore diet. And if I recall, 95% had improvement in their symptoms, up to 90% had improvement in the medical conditions. Their triglycerides and HDL got better. And those are the metabolic markers. It is 100% important to lean on those studies when you don't have randomized controlled trials, which is why we need more. And that's kind of the purpose of observational studies, which is what that Harvard study was. It's a study that says we now have permission and a reason and the motivation to move forward with additional research, because if 95% of people are doing better, we have to address that further. So now, for purposes of carnivore, what you want to do is understand carnivore is a keto-like diet. So therefore, when you see keto-like studies that are randomized controlled trials doing really well, then you can then kind of hypothesize it's likely, since this is a keto diet as well, that that's going to then lead to the outcomes that we seek. What we don't want to do is be so afraid of a dietary pattern that seems a little extreme that is helping so many people, particularly for autoimmune disease, neurodegenerative diseases like dementia and Huntington's, and things like metabolic health, and of course, particularly mental illness. And I do want to do a shout out to Dr. Georgia Ede, who has a new book that talks about mental health. And just like others in that space, we're now telling people, yes, you can stabilize your and in some cases reverse mental health conditions with dietary changes. So I think what we have to do is combine what we do have anecdotal experiences, which is why I like the steak and butter game. We have all of these testimonials. We combine that with the observational research for carnivore. We connect that carnivore research to keto until we get more carnivore research, and then we take our personal experience. People cannot wait to heal. If we wait for the guidelines to change, there will be so many people who will never heal because they've never heard this information. Their doctor hadn't heard this information. Their nutrition professional hadn't heard this information, and therefore they won't heal when we have plenty of evidence to suggest that this is a great way to heal. So I'm really, again, just trying to be one of the messengers who's out there saying, guys, this is something to consider, and you'll probably do way better than taking that pill that you've been advised to take. As a doctor, I won't rely on N=1 to then impact the entire population. But if I'm an individual and I am given permission to do an experiment and my outcome is amazing, then that's the best. There's no better experiment than an N=1 for you and me. The most important test is the experiment you do on yourself. You just need permission to try things that maybe you wouldn't have tried because of the fears that existed that have been debunked already. So I think that's the key. And that's why I think that N=1 is important. But I then can't, if I have one patient that does well on carnivore and I don't have any additional evidence, I can't then have the whole clinic doing carnivore. I have to have more evidence. And that's what a true science, it's almost like, your peers are supposed to vet whatever you claim is true. You have a hypothesis, then your peers are saying, that's an interesting hypothesis. Instead of demonizing you, they should be curious and say, oh my God, that's amazing. What did you do? And let me see if I can duplicate that. And that's what the research community should look like.
Did you struggle with any side effects, any health concerns because of the vegan diet? Because you were vegan for 8 years.
8 years. And shout out to my wife for tolerating me.
Was she vegan with you?
It was more vegan and vegetarians. I just want to say that first. And I did it because, and even my patients, my God, they would come in and they were trying to do their thing. But for me, it was more staying bloated, having gas, having that irritability. But I think about this in a broader context, which is the big picture. And what I found is that the vegan diet is it has a lot of hidden side effects that we don't think about. And most of that is related to nutrient deficiencies, right? And when you're nutrient deficient, your risk for cancer is higher, your risk for stroke is higher, your risk for breaking your bones are higher, because of that vitamin D. Your risk for, just not thriving in general, your risk for hair loss, being depressed. So all of these things are hidden side effects. So for me, the real issue is how do I deal with the potential deficiencies? I can be very smart and have all the information about what I need to worry about. In the community I serve on the south side of Chicago, that's very difficult for them to have a well-formulated vegan diet and be successful. So I'm going to still worry about B12 deficiencies. I'm going to still worry about vitamin D and omega-3 deficiency. And I see so many vegans come into my clinic who are iron deficient. So what I tell my patients is the following: can you get most of the nutrients you need in a plant-based diet if it's well done? The answer is yes. If I'm thinking about B12, can I get enough B12 from mushrooms and nutritional yeast? Of course I can. But is it better to come from fish and red meat and eggs? Of course it is. Can I get vitamin D from mushrooms and algae and things like that? Of course I can, but is it better to get it from fish and egg yolks and beef liver? Of course it is. And even now we know vitamin D needs to come with K12. So if I'm going to do vitamin D, I need the K, and I call K12 the usher to kind of usher me from my arteries, which can clog my arteries, that calcium, and the joint, so I won't get arthritis. So the vitamin D will help you absorb the calcium, but it's the K2's job to then usher it into your bones. Well, guess where you get K2? You get it from animal source meat. You can get it a little bit from fermented foods, so you can get it that way, but it's not really optimal. I also think about my vision. I did have LASIK, so I cheated a little bit, Bella, and had LASIK. But I think about vitamin A, and yes, I can get vitamin A from plants. I can. But vitamin A gives us beta carotene, and beta carotene has to be converted to vitamin A. And there's only about a maybe 1 out of 12% conversion rate. So to get the active form of vitamin A, it's going to be a little harder. So there's so many nutritional things, rather so, omega-3, same story. The plants have this ALA type of omega. We need the DHA and the EPA, and only about 5 to 10% of the plant omega is going to convert to the form we need. Same thing with iron. If we're iron deficient, and then we are getting a source of iron that's not as readily available, like non-heme, we need the heme iron from meat, which will be more available to the body, so that I won't have to take twice as much iron to get to the RDA, which is still not enough. So what I find is that when I think about myself and my patients, why would I go down that rabbit hole when I can just eat a steak that has all of this good stuff in it? That's all I'm saying. So to me, it's like if I had a population that was able to do this and they really had good reason to do it, I absolutely think that's fine. But if you're going to look at the population as a whole, I think we do much better by giving them the essential amino acids and fatty acids you see in animal foods so that they won't have to worry about all of these details. The only thing I even think about is I may take omega-3 because I don't eat as much fish. I may take periodically I will take maybe some type of mineral, or maybe magnesium, potassium, sodium, because with this dietary pattern you may lose those electrolytes. But for the most part, I don't really think about it. But you have to think about it if you're plant-based, and that's why I think this is a better dietary approach when it comes to carnivore and keto.
I don't know how you switched over from vegan to carnivore. Was it like a gradual transition, or did you go overnight vegan to carnivore?
It was an overnight thing. It was a bacon day, and my wife was like, "Why is this bacon here?" And so it was like, but that moment was a beautiful moment because she was like, "This bacon tastes pretty good." So it was a little sudden, but
Wow.
but I'm living in a household where my family was motivated to move towards the animal-based diet. So when I presented that to them and showed some evidence for it, it was kind of easy for us. I had already been eating those burgers that are not really burgers. But thankfully, when we ate it, not only did it taste great, but it didn't make us feel sick. And I know some people psychologically can't make that flip, but for us, it was fairly easy. And we were definitely heavily animal based before we made that change. So it was pretty
Got
easy
it.
for us.
How did your patients respond? Because they must have looked up to you as their vegan doctor, and especially your patients who were vegan with you. How did they respond when they found out you started eating meat again?
They were excited. I find that people were excited, but this is the key. I had to give them permission. So of course they would raise questions about, well, are you sure this is okay, doc? Because I'm really concerned about whether or not I'm gonna clog my arteries, and things like
Right.
that. So what I would do when I present stuff to patients, I always present it in a way that honored their concerns. And what I would do is say, hey, did you know that saturated fat, when it comes to randomized controlled trials, is not associated with heart disease? Not only is it not associated, as suggested by the Journal of the College of Cardiology, it's actually protective against stroke. So they would hear that. Oh, by the way, did you not know that when the World Health Organization suggested that this red meat was harmful for your risk for cancer? Did you not know that every study that was looked at, it was about 14 of them, they were all observational studies which don't show causation. They only show possible association or correlation. And when it did increase your risk eating bacon every day, 5 pieces of bacon for the rest of your life, it only went up from 5 to 6%. So would you not eat bacon if it only went up from 5? And most of them say, I'm still gonna eat my bacon. So once you give them like some evidence to say this is a little exaggerated, this is something that's really not something you should be concerned about, they're willing to then take that leap. But you have to put some science in front of them, because if you don't do that, who do you trust? And it goes back to your earlier question. What do you do when you're going to leave out of the office and then you're going to see a study that says, don't eat eggs, right? And I think what I try to do is help them understand. My job is to not have them read the studies like I do. My job is to say, if you see something that concerns you, send me a message through the patient portal. I'll provide the study or the clarification to reassure you, because up to this point, we have a ton of evidence that supports eating this way. By the way, the American Diabetes Association is saying it's okay. Oh, by the way, the American Heart Association, they're saying it's okay. Oh, by the way, the Association of Clinical Endocrinology. So when you put that type of information in front of them, they feel more comfortable.
Do you have an archive of studies and resources that you share to your patients?
I'll use the Public Health Collaborative. If someone searches Healthline low carb versus low fat, time to end the fad, that's something that's very palatable and easy for them to read. So I will kind of point them in that direction. I like the Diet Doctor has some studies on their website as well. And if you just type, evidence for low carb Diet Doctor, you'll see those studies as well. And I think the Metabolic Multiplier is another site that if you search Metabolic Multiplier studies, I think that site has studies as well. So I think there's plenty of studies out there. Most of my patients are not that sophisticated. All they care about, oh, my A1C is dropping. Once they see, because I tell them your A1C being elevated for diabetes is going to kill you way faster than anything else you would worry about. So let's just fix that, and we'll worry about saturated fat later. We'll worry about this other stuff later. Let's fix the thing that's most likely to harm you. And you could easily argue that obesity and diabetes are the most deadly things that will harm most people over the course of their lifetime. So if we fix those things, no matter what else we're going to work on, we'll be in a better position to then achieve our goals, because those are the things that impact our metabolic health the most. So, and using that language, we explain to them what is metabolic health, what is it, what's the criteria, the HDL, the triglycerides, your belly size, and the blood pressure and the blood sugar. I say, if we fix that, that's 80% of all chronic illnesses. So if we fix that, you probably don't even have to worry about that dementia that you were worried about, because they call that type 3 diabetes. You don't have to worry about that cancer. That I did an entire video, if they search my name and cancer on YouTube, where we show that cancer is likely a metabolic disease. It's not as likely a genetic disease, because there's plenty of cancers out there that don't have genetic issues. But literally all cancers have metabolic or dysfunction of the mitochondria issues, which is more of a metabolic. So if we fix the metabolic health of people, they will not be at risk as much as they were previously for those conditions. And that gives people hope, because most people think that they're destined to have the outcome that their parents had. They're destined to get diabetes. They're destined to have cancer. Everybody had cancer. But what they don't realize is that it's the other parts of that life, culture, history that were the risk factors, not just your genetics. And if we can fix the things we can control, now we have a pathway to healing.
I'm curious, do you prescribe a carnivore diet or a keto meat heavy diet to your patients?
It depends on what their medical condition is. So this is how I frame it. I'll say when you reduce carbs, you're likely going to do better than you're doing today. If you have, going back to the things that impact people the most. So if you have autoimmune diseases, if you have mental health issues, and if you have neurodegenerative diseases, I always frame it and say, listen, of the things that will help you dietarily, carnivore is your best diet for those conditions, period. However, we can ease you into that by going low carb or keto, see how you do, and then we can ease you into carnivore if you feel better. Because for me, and then I'll personalize. I say, for me, I did low carb, I did keto, I did better, but not until I went carnivore that my irritable bowel problem issue get resolved. So we don't know where you're going to be on the spectrum, but we want you to just have no fear that this dietary pattern, this sounds pretty extreme, is going to be an issue for you. So that's kind of how I frame it. Most of my patients will all try to do less than 50 carbs a day. And then depending on their particular needs and their desires will decide. Because some people say, I just like to eat vegetables sometimes, doc. I say, well, would you consider ketovore? So we'll kind of work with them. And ultimately, we're looking for results. And whatever we need to do to get the results, that's what we'll do. And sometimes they're doing carnivore and they're finding that dairy doesn't work. So we'll have to, so my job is to problem solve and to see what that particular person needs in that particular moment, and then give them permission to not get into the cults, you don't have to be in a particular group to be successful. You just have to do what's best, because we're going back to that experiment N of one. And that's how I approach it, giving people a little flexibility.
So you give them the option, kind of going low carb and telling them the studies, and they kind of follow suit. And if they have any issues, for example, some people can't handle heavy meat right out the first,
That's
you
right.
guide them through that.
Yeah, and you say to them, okay, if you haven't been eating meat, you may not be making enough acid. So
Right.
we can mitigate that. We can give you some acid, if we need to. But you don't want to, but what they think is, I can't tolerate meat because I can't tolerate meat. I said, no, you just don't have enough acid, as an example. So I think, and what I try to do is what to expect, right? So if they kind of know, I may get a little tired, headache, that type of stuff. Maybe I'll get a little keto flu or a carb withdrawal, whichever way you like to say it. Then they know what to expect. And if they know what to expect, then they will not freak out when they have those symptoms. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to do. If I tell a person, yes, you're going from a glucose fuel to a ketone fuel. So if you get a headache, or you have mental fog, or you feel tired or irritable or nauseated or whatever, or you're not sleeping well or even getting constipated, you should expect that maybe. Oh, by the way, you can mitigate that by taking a supplement. Maybe the electrolytes will solve that problem. So every patient doesn't get electrolytes out the gate, but I tell them, by the way, if you have these symptoms, you may want to do this.
Speaking of electrolytes, if you feel like you are low on sodium, potassium, or magnesium, or are going through symptoms like headache, fatigue, muscle cramping, lower endurance in the gym, these are all signs of the adaptation phase. You can either salt all of your carnivore meals a lot more generously to help alleviate those symptoms, or lean on a high quality electrolyte supplement. And the one that I recommend is this one from Element, specifically this blue colored box labeled raw unflavored, because it doesn't have any stevia, no flavorings, no additives, sodium, potassium, magnesium, measured out in the right quantities. Each of the packets are nice and small, so you can pack it on the go. You just rip one open, pour it in whatever beverage you're drinking, mix it up, drink it down, and you are good to go. If you would like to try a free sample pack with any purchase, and this sample pack does include the raw unflavored for you to try, you can visit the URL shown on the screen, drinklmnt.com/SBGAL. I've also linked them down below.
So I think the key is to prepare them. And when you prepare people and they have firm goals, why am I doing this in the first place? They have a why and they're comfortable with incremental change and we're going to notice all the improvements. It's not the scale today. We're going to focus on the A1C today. We're going to focus on the triglycerides going down. Give them something else to focus on, or just the fact that you just feel better. I feel better, doc. Well, that's a victory. We don't need a scale to change. We're going to celebrate that. Oh, by the way, when your scale didn't change, maybe you gained a little muscle and you lost a little fat and it just balanced out. So you have to, so my job is to problem solve, be a little bit of a coach, and just nudge them in the right direction, but never forget you have to honor where they are. I'm big into social determinants of health. I'm big into health equity. And if I see somebody struggling, I assume there's a reason for it. I assume that the lady who can't do the dietary pattern may have an issue in her relationship at home. So I need to address the relationship. I assume that they may live in a food desert and don't have access to the types of foods I have access to. So I'll say, by the way, we have a food pharmacy. We give out food every 2 weeks in our health system. Did you not know that? Is there a food pharmacy with the Chicago Food Depository near you? We give them resources. I never look at a person and assume that they struggle because they want to struggle. Do you know anybody that wants to struggle? I don't. They struggle because there's some economic issues. There's some relationship issues. There are some social isolation issues. There's other things that make them struggle. So as a doctor, my job is to be a detective. I can't expect them to know all this stuff. They're in the middle of a storm. They can't see nothing but the storm. My job is to say, hey, I got an umbrella. I see things are a little clearer for me. So let me show you what I see. And by the way, I got a coach that can help you, like the steak and butter gang. I got a therapist because this marriage is really rough. I got the food pharmacy. Oh, by the way, we have ways to reduce stress. By the way, here's some things you can do for your sleep. Here are some other things you can do. And then they're then maybe ready to talk about keto or carnivore. But if you don't address those root causes of why they struggle, you will then point your finger at them, assuming that they struggle because they are not motivated enough. And again, I don't know anybody that's not motivated to be healthy. So my job and our job is to put our arms around people and say there are people that look just like you, who have the same resources as you, who have the same medical conditions like you, and they've all healed. And they've healed by doing these dietary patterns. They move their body, they've reduced their stress, they've recognized the other things. Maybe they had trauma in the past and we didn't address it. So we're going to address the trauma. And so we do all of those things. Now we have the recipe for success. And a year from now, they will be in a much better place. And I also remind them that struggle is part of the journey. So if you continue to struggle, you better expect to. There's going to be struggle. Rather, it's something happening in another country, which is happening right now, or something happening in your own home. Stuff's going to happen. And so your job is to not keep stuff from happening. You have to change yourself so that you can handle those struggles when they occur. And that's all we can do because they're going to keep happening. I really think that that's the way we have to manage through life, because otherwise we're going to put too much energy and too much power into other things we can't control. And if we do that, we will always fail. I want to have control over Tony and accept the things I can't control. And I think if we do those things, that'll be enough. That's the good news. It'll be enough. Because if you just do that, you'll be doing more than the average person and you'll overcome most of the things that have been barriers in the past.
Have you faced any backlash from the medical community for your dietary switch?
When I first started my journey, I really wasn't doing videos on YouTube. I wasn't doing a podcast. In our health system, Advocate Health, we're expected to follow the guidelines, but we're also allowed to be our own type of clinician, right? So I never got a lot of backlash. And I think and what I try to do is when I frame things, I try to frame it through the lens of other people. So I understand why a person who's vegan is vegan. There may be religious reasons, there may be cultural reasons. So there may be animal rights reasons, right? So, and although I may not always agree with those reasons, environmental reasons, I understand that that's what it is. So I just try to make sure that when I'm messaging, I always message in a way that honors the person in front of me. And because I approach it that way, and because I'm a kind of a nice guy and I'm easygoing, I'm not making fun of people on YouTube, I think people are comfortable. In fact, when I was at the Society of Metabolic Health the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners conference in the summer of 2023, my topic was how vegans and carnivores can live in harmony. That was my topic because I do believe that that's a true thing. And it may require us moving towards regenerative farming because that way you honor the animals and you also honor the plant-based approach is more ethical, etc. But what I try to do is help people understand that, for example, you can't like have plants. If you raise a lot of plants, you're gonna harm animals. There's no way around that. So what you do is you provide context and say, if I have a lot of plants being grown, I have to protect the plants. So I'm gonna put stuff on the plants. It may hurt the bugs. Well, if I kill the bugs, the rodents and the birds have to eat too. So so we have to be honest about these things. But more importantly, we have to be honest about what kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world where we have an intellectual conversation about what's best to eat, what's not best to eat, and we just have a nice, friendly debate about it? Or do we want to live in a world like in New York, where on Mondays and Fridays you can't eat meat? Because if we flipped it, and on Mondays and Fridays we only eat plants, I'm sorry, meat, and we don't let the plant people eat the plants, then is that the world we want to live in? Where we're kind of forcing people to adopt our belief systems, which are only based on our life experiences, which may or may not be serving us. Because before I was an animal-based diet, my life experiences told me that the plant-based diet was the best diet. But then additional life experiences taught me that that may not be the best for Tony. So we just want to live in a world where people get information and then they're allowed to make their own decision. That's a better world. That's the American way for those who are in America, hopefully in more places in the world. And I think that's a better model so that people can then make the best decision for themselves. So that's the approach I take. And that's why I don't think I get a lot of pushback. Even though I'm in a large health system, conventional health system, but I'm able to kind of message this model with my patients. And as I lead things like the food pharmacy and other programs, I'm able to message that in a way that serves everybody. And even though I'm a carnivore, a food pharmacy is growing plants. So how ironic is that, right? But I think that for those who want to eat that way, they should be allowed to understand it's about eating real food. That's the number one goal. And then you decide which of the real foods is best for you. And for me, it's an animal-based diet.
Do you believe that plants do play a role as far as medicine?
That's a great question. Yes. And when I did my video with Carrie of Homestead How YouTube channel and Jeff I think it's Jeff is a guy who has colon cancer, I think that metastasized to the liver. So we did a video about cancer. In the video, we talked about 3 things. One was cancer cells love sugar. So if we cut the sugar down, which is great for keto and carnivore, the cancer cells are gonna starve and struggle. And that's the Warburg effect. We talked about people who are being treated for cancer, and if they do fasting prior to chemo, how that's better for your treatment because the healthy cells go dormant when you're fasting, and the cancer cells they'll keep rapidly growing, so the chemo will target that better. So fasting before chemo, which is a paradox in a way, works really well. But the last thing we talked about is repurposed medications, like something like metformin, and supplements that are good for cancer prevention and treatment. And if you look at that list, right, and we can share that, that list will include things like green tea extract, right? These are plant type supplements, some of them. Therefore, that's exactly what I do with plants. I look at it as like medicine. So in a particular instant, when you're trying to get benefit, particularly when it's evidence-based, which is what this was in this case. It was a monograph created by Dr. Mercer and his team, and it was a 70-page, and it was all evidence-based. In that setting, if you take the right plant-based supplements for a particular treatment, that's how I personally would look at plants. So I think in the setting, and most medicines come from plants anyway, right? So I think there's a place for plants, but for health, just to maintain your body, it should be animal-based. But when you're trying to treat a particular issue, chemo is very toxic, but in the right setting, chemo may be a good idea. See what I'm saying? So that's how I would frame it. And so when Dr. Anthony Chaffee said plants are trying to kill you, he's not wrong. But what I would say is that there may be times when the plants will be helpful. Now, if I try to do a green tea extract with my belly, it's probably not going to go well. It's probably going to irritate me, right? So when I look at the list of things you can do, I would probably lean towards the things that are not likely to irritate me or be comfortable doing it temporarily to get a benefit if I'm being treated for cancer. But that's how I approach it. And I think that we need more research, but it's clear that there are times when plants can be a benefit.
Thank you all so much for watching the video. If you would like to get to know Dr. Tony Hampton, ask him your questions, or work with him, Dr. Hampton is a resident expert in our community, the Steak and Butter Gang. He visits us every single month to answer member questions, to help troubleshoot, and speak on topics that we request for. In addition to Dr. Hampton, I will also be inviting on all the faces shown on the screen: Dr. Sean Baker, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, Dr. Elizabeth Bright, Dr. Robert Kiltz, and Coach Rebecca Heichman. To join the upcoming challenge, just visit the URL shown on the screen, sbgmeetup.com, or click the links down below in the description box. And finally, just wanted to wrap up with something that I've been incorporating every single day. This has definitely become a staple for me. They're called blue blockers, and if you don't know what blue blockers are, they're just eye protectors from blue light. Blue light is in every device. Anything that is digital, our computer, our TV, our phones, our iPads, tablets of any sort. Wearing blue blockers will protect our eyes against this blue light so that they don't feel strained, dry, and irritated after a long day of being in front of screens. Blue blockers are also excellent to wear right before bedtime so our bodies can unwind and produce more melatonin for a deeper sleep at night. These blue blockers are from Buncharge, and if you guys would like to invest in a pair for yourself, I've linked my favorites down below in the description box. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. SVG out.